When I walked into her kitchen and saw the way she smiled at me, I felt a chill run down my spine. That smile, it wasn't the one I remembered. It was a secret smile, the kind that hides something you're not supposed to see. I froze, halfway between the doorway and the living room, the faint smell of cinnamon and burnt toast filling the air. My hand rested on the wooden frame, knuckles white. For a moment, I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't move. Everything I thought I knew about my life, my family, my own story, it felt fragile, like a glass ornament teetering on the edge of a shelf. I had come over to see my best friend from childhood, Mara, someone who had been with me through scraped knees, late-night phone calls, and every heartbreak that life had thrown at me. But that day, her eyes held something I couldn't quite name, something heavier than guilt, yet lighter than fear. And I didn't know it yet, but she knew something I had spent my entire life unaware of, that I wasn't born to the family I loved and trusted. Life before that day had been ordinary, comforting in its way. I grew up in a small, sunlit house on Elm Street, where the scent of coffee always mingled with freshly baked bread in the mornings. My parents, both kind and steady, had been my anchors, Mom with her soft voice that could soothe any tantrum, Dad with his quiet laugh that made the world feel safe. I had a brother, Jason, 3 years older, who teased me endlessly but would drop everything to help me when I was in trouble. School was predictable. I wasn't the smartest in class, but I wasn't the worst either. I had friends, hobbies, a routine that felt secure. We had movie nights every Friday, Sunday dinners with the extended family, and the occasional road trip to the lake where my parents would argue playfully over who made the better sandwiches. It was warm, it was familiar, and I had never questioned it. Mara had been part of that warmth. She had been my neighbor, my confidant, the sister I never had. I could spend hours in her room, sprawled across her floral couch, sharing secrets and dreams and plans for the future. We promised each other that we'd always be honest, no matter what, that nothing would ever come between us. But life has a way of hiding cracks in the foundation. It started subtly. Mara began calling less often. Not drastically, just enough that I noticed. Her messages had a small delay, her jokes felt rehearsed. I chalked it up to her busy schedule, her new job, and the usual adult responsibilities. Then came the first odd moment. I was at her house one afternoon, helping her pack for a trip, and I noticed a folder tucked beneath a pile of magazines on her coffee table. It was labeled with my name. My first instinct was curiosity, but curiosity quickly turned to hesitation. I could feel the heat creeping up my neck as I hesitated before asking. "What's this?" I said, trying to sound casual. Mara froze. Her fingers clutched a mug of tea as if it were a shield. "Oh, that's just some old paperwork," she said, voice too light, too airy. "Nothing important." But it was the way she avoided my gaze that unsettled me. My gut twisted. I laughed nervously, waving her off. Okay. Don't worry about it." And yet, I couldn't let it go. The unease settled in my chest, a weight that grew heavier each day. Every smile from her began to feel like a puzzle, every hug like it was hiding something. I found myself analyzing every word, every gesture, and I realized, I was noticing things I had never noticed before, and I hated myself for it. For doubting her. For doubting the life I had always believed in. The following weeks brought more strange moments. Phone calls that ended abruptly, conversations that she steered away from whenever I brought up family, small, almost imperceptible hesitations in her voice. I told myself I was overreacting. Mara was my best friend, she wouldn't lie to me, right? Couldn't lie to me. And yet, the seed of doubt had been planted. It grew quietly, gnawing at the edges of my trust. I found myself replaying memories, searching for signs I had missed, the way she sometimes glanced at my parents when we were together, the odd questions she asked about my childhood, the strange way she would sometimes change the subject if my adoption, or lack thereof, was mentioned in passing. I never thought of myself as adopted. I had always assumed that the small gaps in my early memories, the occasional hints of stories that didn't quite make sense, were normal. Every birthday, every family photo, every story told at the dinner table reinforced that belief. And now, for reasons I couldn't yet name, I began to question it. The tension built slowly. Every time I called her, my heart beat faster. Every time I visited, I scanned her face for answers. I began to notice the little lies, the half-truths, the pauses, the discomfort she carried like an invisible burden. It wasn't dramatic at first. There were no shouting matches, no confessions. Just a quiet, persistent unease, a feeling that the world I knew was slightly askew, like a photograph hung crooked on the wall. And then came the day I would never forget, the day the truth began to whisper so loudly that it could no longer be ignored. I had been over at her house for coffee, the air rich with the scent of baked goods and the faint perfume she always wore. We were laughing about something trivial, the kind of easy conversation that once made me feel safe, when her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and I saw it, her hand trembling just slightly, the smile flickering, almost breaking. She set the phone down and met my eyes. There was a moment of silence, thick and heavy, as though the air itself was holding its breath. And then she said, softly, almost too quietly to hear. I think it's time you knew something about your past. About your real family. The words didn't hit me immediately. I blinked. My chest tightened. My stomach lurched. And in that instant, I knew, everything I had taken for granted about my life, about myself, was about to change forever. Her words lingered in the air long after she said them. Your real family. I could barely breathe. I wanted to laugh, nervously, desperately, but my throat felt tight, like I had swallowed something too large to pass. Mara reached across the table, her hand brushing mine lightly. I didn't mean to scare you. You deserve to know. I forced a smile. Know what? What are you talking about? Her eyes darted away, and I realized, then, that this wasn't a casual confession. This was something she had carried for years. Something she had kept from me deliberately. And that's when the first clue hit me, not a revelation, not a confession, but a subtle, almost imperceptible sign that something was off. She hesitated too long before answering my questions about my early childhood, the gaps in my memory that had always puzzled me suddenly making sense. She couldn't, or wouldn't, speak freely. The days that followed were quiet, but unbearable. I couldn't stop thinking about her words. Every phone call with my parents felt different. Every visit to my childhood home carried a strange weight, as though I were walking in a place I didn't fully belong. I started noticing small inconsistencies, photographs that didn't match the stories, names in family albums I didn't recognize, mentions of relatives I had never met. At first, I tried to ignore it. I told myself I was overreacting, that Mara's comment had been misinterpreted. Maybe she was joking, or maybe she had confused something. But the seed of doubt had taken root, and it spread like roots through soil, pushing through every memory I had once held as certain. One afternoon, I went through a box of old letters and photographs in my parents' attic. Dust motes danced in the sunlight filtering through the small window, and the smell of old paper made my chest tighten. I found a photograph of a baby, my baby, but the face looked slightly different from the reflection I saw in the mirror every morning. The note on the back had a name I didn't recognize. My heart started pounding. That night, I confronted Mara over the phone. Are you saying I was adopted? I asked, voice trembling. There was a pause. I could hear her breathing. And then, softly, I can't tell you everything right now. But yes, you were adopted. I've known for years. The words fell like stones in my stomach. I sank into my bed, my hands gripping the sheets so tightly that my knuckles ached. All the certainty of my life, all the memories I had relied on, suddenly felt fragile. The walls of my childhood home seemed smaller, the laughter in my memory hollow. Over the next few weeks, I became hyper-aware of Mara's behavior. Every visit, every casual gesture, every shared meal carried hidden meaning. She would sometimes pause mid-sentence, her eyes flitting to something I couldn't see. She smiled in ways that didn't reach her eyes, laughed too loudly at jokes I hadn't made, and asked about my parents in ways that made my stomach knot. I began piecing together moments from my childhood that had seemed normal but now felt strange. The way she had always been present whenever a family story came up. The way she sometimes avoided photo shoots, claiming shyness. The way she subtly redirected conversations when anyone brought up early memories. I couldn't shake the feeling that she had been protecting me, or protecting herself, from something. The more I tried to push it aside, the more it consumed me. I started noticing the tiny, almost imperceptible clues she had left behind, the way she sometimes slipped documents into her bag when she thought I wasn't looking, the way she would glance at my parents with a mixture of concern and guilt. One evening, I decided to follow her, not in a sinister way, but out of desperation. I wanted to see what she did when she thought no one was watching, to understand why she had lied. I drove slowly past her street, heart racing, and saw her enter a small, nondescript building I had never noticed before. The sign above the door said Records and Adoption Services. My hands trembled on the steering wheel. The pieces were falling into place, and yet I was terrified of the full picture. I began keeping a journal, trying to make sense of my feelings. Every entry started with a question: why didn't anyone tell me? What was the point of lying for so long? How could Mara, my closest friend, hide something like this? At work, I felt distracted. The hum of fluorescent lights, the clatter of keyboards, even the smell of the office coffee seemed to pierce me in unexpected ways. I found myself staring at coworkers' family photos on desks, imagining what it would be like to not know who you truly are, to have your past hidden behind layers of secrecy. I remember one particular morning, standing in front of the mirror, brushing my hair. I paused, looking at my reflection. The face staring back at me was mine, undeniably, but suddenly unfamiliar. I traced the line of my jaw, the curve of my eyes, and realized that identity is a fragile thing, shaped not just by biology, but by the stories we're told, the love we receive, and the truths we choose to share or conceal. Mara called that night. I answered reluctantly, holding the phone like it might explode. I need to know why, I said. My voice shook, the tremor betraying the calm I tried to maintain. There was a long pause. Finally, she whispered, I wanted to protect you. I thought, maybe it wasn't the right time. I didn't want to hurt you. Her words were both comforting and maddening. She had lied for years, but she framed it as love. It didn't feel like love. It felt like control. And yet, part of me wanted to forgive her, wanted to believe that she had only acted out of care, out of fear. The tension between us grew, unspoken but palpable. Every interaction was loaded, every smile weighed down with the past she refused to reveal fully. I was left with pieces of a puzzle I didn't understand, fragments of a story that wasn't mine yet was, in some ways, intimately connected to everything I had ever known. The first clue, Mara's secretive behavior, the folder, her subtle avoidance, was only the beginning. It pulled me down a path I hadn't anticipated, forcing me to question the people I trusted most, the memories I held dear, and even myself. It was a slow, simmering revelation, like a storm gathering on the horizon, and I had no choice but to brace for it. Little did I know, the full betrayal, the kind that would shake me to my core, was still waiting. And when it came, it would leave no corner of my life untouched. I never imagined the day would come when I would hold proof of a life I had never lived. The discovery wasn't cinematic, no dramatic confrontation at the doorway, it was quiet, almost painfully ordinary, which somehow made it worse. It started with Mara. She called me one evening, her voice unusually tense. I think it's time you saw some things, she said, her words clipped, like she had rehearsed them 1,000 times. I felt my stomach drop. Saw what? I asked, though a part of me already knew the answer. I'll explain when you come over. I can't do it over the phone. When I arrived at her apartment, she was pacing, wringing her hands, her eyes darting to the corner of the room where a small, locked filing cabinet sat. I had never noticed it before. The air smelled faintly of coffee and old paper, a comforting scent now twisted with tension. She finally stopped pacing and faced me, her expression raw. I've carried this for years, she whispered. I thought I was protecting you, but maybe I just delayed the truth. Your real parents, they're not the people you grew up with. I swallowed hard. My hands gripped the edge of her kitchen counter. Why didn't anyone tell me? Why let me live all these years thinking, my voice caught, and I could barely finish the sentence. Why lie? She looked down, shame evident in the way her shoulders slumped. I didn't know how. I didn't know if you'd forgive anyone. I wanted to wait until you were ready. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. I wanted to shake her until she admitted the full truth. Instead, I nodded, trembling. Show me. She opened the cabinet, revealing a stack of folders labeled with my name in neat, precise handwriting. She pulled one out, dust rising from its edges. Inside were adoption papers, medical records, letters from social workers, and photographs. The photos showed a little girl, me, unmistakably, but with different parents, a different home, a different life I had never known. I ran my fingers over the papers, a chill spreading through me. Each document, each image, was proof of a reality I had been denied. My birth mother's handwriting, jagged and nervous, scrawled on forms. My birth father's signature, confident yet distant. And Mara, she had known, all this time, and never told me. I can't believe this, I whispered. My voice sounded foreign even to me. All these years, how could anyone, hide this from me? I thought I was doing the right thing, Mara said softly, tears in her eyes. I thought I was keeping you safe from a life that might have hurt you. I never imagined it would break you like this. Her words did nothing to comfort me. Every sentence felt like a shard of glass slicing into my chest. I realized then that the betrayal wasn't just the secret, it was the choice to lie for years, to shape my reality without my consent, to let me believe a story that wasn't mine. The next days were a blur. I pored over every document, trying to reconcile the life I had known with the life I had never lived. Letters from social workers spoke of careful placement, loving foster homes, and the decision to place me with parents who could give me stability. And yet, Mara had lied. She had known, and she had chosen silence. I confronted my parents, not angrily, but with a quiet, heavy determination. I know the truth, I said. Their faces went pale, and I realized they had always assumed I didn't know. My mother reached for my hand. We always hoped you'd never find out this way, she said. We love you more than anything. You're our daughter, in every way that matters. I nodded, trying to absorb her words. But the betrayal I felt wasn't aimed at them, it was aimed at Mara. My friend. My confidant. The one person I had trusted more than anyone in the world. She had lied. She had held my identity in her hands and decided when, if ever, I would know. I remember the night I confronted her again. I went to her apartment, heart pounding, hands shaking. The room smelled faintly of vanilla candles, the kind she always used to calm her nerves. She looked up, startled, when I entered. I need answers, I said, my voice low but steady. Why? Why keep this from me all these years? Her eyes filled with tears. I thought it was the right choice. I really did. I didn't want to see you hurt, confused, angry. I thought I could protect you from the pain of knowing your birth parents weren't your family in the way you believed. I shook my head, disbelief and hurt warring inside me. Protect me? Mara, this isn't protection. This is control. This is deciding my life for me. How could you choose to let me live a lie? She flinched, as if my words physically struck her. I was scared. Scared you'd hate me. Scared you'd hate everyone. I felt a tremor in my chest. Her fear was real, her motives human, but the consequences were undeniable. I had been robbed of my story, my history, my right to know who I truly was. I don't know if I can forgive you, I said, voice barely above a whisper. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I need to know everything. No more lies, no more secrets. I need the truth, all of it. She nodded, trembling. I'll tell you everything. I promise. And so she did. Over the next hours, she unraveled the thread she had held so tightly for so long. The adoption, the reasons for secrecy, the people who had made the decisions, the letters she had intercepted, the phone calls she had diverted. Every story was layered with complexity, every choice tinged with fear and love, yet every moment reinforced the magnitude of her deception. I learned things that broke my heart, about my birth mother, who had struggled with circumstances she could not control, about my birth father, who had fought in his own quiet way to see me safe, about Mara, who had made choices she believed were right but whose consequences were devastating. By the end, I was exhausted. Emotionally drained, raw, and trembling. I sat on her couch, the folder of papers on my lap, and realized that life as I had known it was gone. My identity, my understanding of who I was, had been fractured, reshaped by years of silence and lies. And yet, despite everything, I knew something crucial: the truth, however painful, was now mine. I could no longer live in the comfortable ignorance of childhood. I had to face reality, all of it, the hurt, the betrayal, the love, and the complexity of human choices. I spent that night in a restless haze, the stack of papers still on my lap, the living room quiet except for the ticking of Mara's old wall clock. Every tick seemed louder than the last, marking the seconds I had lost living someone else's story. My chest ached with a mix of anger, grief, and betrayal. By morning, I knew I had to act. Not with vengeance, not with yelling or threats, but with clarity. I needed to understand everything, and I needed to reclaim the narrative of my life. The first step was confrontation. Mara had been honest about the adoption, but she had withheld details that mattered: letters, records, contacts. I asked her to go through every piece of information she had hidden. We sat at her kitchen table, the folder open between us, and I demanded the truth in full. No more half-truths, I said, my voice steady, though my hands shook. I want it all. She hesitated, a shadow crossing her face. Then she nodded, beginning a slow, deliberate confession. Every document she opened, every story she told, was another step closer to reclaiming my life. I listened, scribbled notes, asked questions, demanded clarity. The process was exhausting, physically, emotionally, but it was necessary. I realized quickly that action didn't mean confrontation alone. It meant research, digging into records that Mara hadn't even known about, contacting social workers, even reaching out to distant relatives mentioned in adoption files. I wanted to verify every detail, to ensure that the truths she had hidden from me were real, that I wasn't being misled again. I remember sitting at my kitchen desk late at night, the glow of the laptop screen illuminating my face, emails sent to agencies, phone calls made, messages left. Each response brought fragments of a life I had never known. Names I had never heard, addresses I didn't recognize, stories of a childhood I had missed. Every new piece of information was a shock and a relief, proof that my identity existed beyond the comfortable fiction I had been living. At the same time, I confronted Mara with every inconsistency I uncovered. There were moments of tension so thick you could slice through them. I remember one evening, holding a letter she had intercepted, my voice shaking with anger and hurt. Why? I demanded. Why hide this from me? I trusted you, more than anyone. And you decided that controlling my life was better than letting me know the truth? Tears filled her eyes. I thought it would hurt you too much, she whispered. I didn't know how to tell you. I wanted to protect you from a pain I'd never want anyone to feel. Her explanation made me ache, but it didn't erase the betrayal. I had to separate the intention from the impact. Her fear, her motives, were human, understandable even, but that didn't change the fact that my life had been shaped without my consent. The next step was reaching out to my birth family. I had waited years, half expecting to be rejected, or worse, ignored. But as I spoke to them, over shaky phone lines and through hesitant emails, I felt pieces of myself returning. My birth mother's voice trembled with emotion as she spoke of the circumstances that had forced her to give me up, of the nights she had cried thinking about me, and of the hope that I would one day know her. And my birth father, who had been a quiet presence in her life, spoke of regrets and love in equal measure. "We wanted what was best for you," he said softly. "Even if we couldn't raise you, we always hoped you'd know the truth someday." The conversations were surreal. I was discovering a family I had never met, faces I had never seen, histories I had never known, but they were mine. Every story they shared stitched together the gaps that Mara's secrecy had left in my heart. I also had to confront my adoptive parents, not with anger, but with honesty. They had been my world, the people who had raised me with love and care, and yet, unknowingly, they had been part of the narrative I had accepted without question. "We always wanted to protect you too," my mother said, voice shaking. "We knew only bits of your story, and we wanted you to have a safe, happy childhood. Everything we did was for you." I nodded, holding back tears. My feelings were complicated, a mix of gratitude and confusion, anger and understanding. I realized that forgiveness wasn't immediate, but acknowledging the love that existed despite the lies was essential. Then came the final piece of action, confronting Mara publicly, in a way that established boundaries without destroying the person she was. I didn't want revenge, I wanted accountability. I met her at a quiet cafe, the smell of coffee and pastries grounding me in the moment. "I've talked to everyone," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I know the full story now. And I need to set boundaries. You can't keep controlling my narrative, not anymore." Her eyes welled with tears, and she nodded. "I understand. I never wanted to hurt you. I only wanted to protect you." "But protection doesn't excuse lies," I said gently. "I need honesty now, always, even if it's hard." We sat in silence, the hum of the cafe around us, and I felt a shift. The power in our relationship had changed. I wasn't a child anymore, and I wouldn't let someone else dictate my story. By the end of that week, I felt a fragile sense of agency returning. I had confronted the deception, uncovered hidden truths, and begun building bridges with the people who truly belonged in my life. It wasn't easy. There were tears, arguments, moments of despair, but also moments of connection, clarity, and quiet joy. I realized that action wasn't just about uncovering the truth, it was about reclaiming myself, piece by piece, and refusing to let secrecy define me any longer. Every phone call, every letter, every conversation was a step toward reclaiming the life that had been withheld from me. For the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't in a long while: control. Not over Mara, not over my parents, not over the past, but over my own story, my own identity, my own future. The first time the secret spilled beyond Mara and me, it was at a family dinner. My adoptive parents had invited me over for Sunday dinner, an attempt at normalcy, but I felt a quiet tension thrumming under every polite conversation. The air smelled of roasted chicken and rosemary, familiar and comforting, but I couldn't stop noticing how my brother's gaze lingered too long on me, sensing something had shifted. Finally, I spoke, my voice calm but resolute. "There's something I need to share, something about my past." The table fell silent. My mother's fork paused midair. My father's jaw tightened. Jason's eyebrows shot up, a flicker of confusion and concern crossing his face. I know I was adopted," I said. "And I know some of the choices made around that were kept from me, decisions that affected my life without my knowledge." There was a pause. The weight of my words settled over the room like a slow-moving storm. My parents' faces were unreadable, a mixture of fear, shame, and love. Jason looked at me, eyes wide, searching for the person he had grown up with, and perhaps already seeing someone else entirely. "I'm not here to blame anyone," I continued. "But the truth matters. It always has. And now that I know, I need to make sure everyone around me understands the consequences of secrets like these." The ripple effect began slowly, quietly, like water spilling from a tipped glass. Mara's name inevitably came up. I hadn't intended to confront her publicly at first, but when family members and close friends heard fragments of the story, questions followed. And I chose honesty over evasion. Mara knew, I said once, quietly, when my cousin asked. She knew years ago and didn't tell me. The reaction was immediate. Shock, disbelief, and anger all mingled. People who had always seen Mara as kind, trustworthy, and gentle suddenly began to question her motives. Conversations that had once been casual became tinged with suspicion. Family members whispered, neighbors speculated, and even distant relatives reached out, some to offer support, some to judge. Mara faced the consequences of her secrecy, not in the form of punishment, but in the slow erosion of unquestioned trust. Friends I hadn't seen in years called to ask how she could have lied, how she could have kept such a monumental truth hidden. It wasn't malicious, it was accountability, the natural outcome of deception. I remember a particular afternoon when Mara and I ran into each other at the grocery store. The aisles were quiet, the fluorescent lights humming overhead. She looked exhausted, almost small, and I could see the weight of public scrutiny pressing down on her. I didn't mean for this to happen like this, she whispered, voice trembling. I just wanted to protect you. I never wanted the world to turn against me. I looked at her, feeling the complexity of human intention. I know, I said softly. But secrecy has consequences. People have a right to the truth. I had a right to the truth. That's what this is about, Mara. Not revenge, not hatred, truth. Her shoulders slumped, and she nodded, the first genuine moment of humility I had seen in weeks. I realized then that the public consequences weren't my doing, they were the natural fallout of a lie that had grown too large to contain. At work, I faced another layer of repercussions. A few colleagues had overheard part of the story from casual conversations or social media, and suddenly, my life became a topic of quiet, intrigued discussion. Some whispered supportively, others speculated judgmentally. I learned quickly that public consequences aren't always loud, they can be subtle, like a tension in the air, a shift in demeanor, a momentary glance. I chose to handle it with dignity. I didn't need to explain every detail to anyone, but I made sure my truth was clear. Secrecy can hurt, honesty heals, and accountability matters. Friends who had doubted Mara's actions before now began to see the human side of her decision. They realized she had acted out of fear and love, not malice, but the damage, however unintended, could not be ignored. Family gatherings became a mixture of tension and tentative understanding. Conversations that once flowed easily were now laced with awareness of hidden truths. My parents learned to answer questions honestly. Jason and I rebuilt our bond with acknowledgement of shared history and newfound understanding, and Mara, she began to step back, allowing me space to navigate my identity without interference. One evening, as the sun dipped low and spilled golden light across the living room, Mara came by to return the remaining documents she had held. She placed them on the table with care, her hands trembling slightly. I've given you everything, she said softly. I can't take back the past, but I hope you can move forward. I nodded, swallowing hard. I don't hate you, Mara. But I need space. For me. For my life. The consequences of secrecy, they're real. And I have to honor that by living my truth. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't argue. She simply nodded and left, leaving me in quiet reflection. The public consequence wasn't a dramatic confrontation in court or a social media scandal, it was a gradual, undeniable realignment of trust and perception. People saw the impact of years of hidden truths, and the ripple extended beyond me. Mara faced the moral weight of her choices, while I gained clarity and a strengthened sense of self. I realized that truth has a gravity of its own. It draws attention, shifts relationships, and sometimes exposes those who tried to hide it. But the consequence isn't meant to punish, it's meant to teach, to remind us that honesty, no matter how difficult, is the foundation of trust and human connection. By the end of that chapter, I felt the balance slowly returning. The world hadn't shattered, only rearranged itself. The people around me had to face the truth, and I had survived it, changed but intact, aware that transparency and courage are the only ways to navigate the messiness of life and relationships. The first morning of real quiet after the storm felt surreal. I woke to sunlight spilling gently across my bedroom floor, the smell of brewing coffee from the kitchen downstairs, and for a moment, it felt like I could breathe freely for the first time in months. No secrets hovering, no hidden truths gnawing at me. Just me, and the life I was slowly reclaiming. The healing process was neither linear nor easy. Some mornings, grief returned like an uninvited guest. I would think of Mara, of the years of lies, of the childhood I had never truly lived, and my chest would tighten as if the air had been pulled from my lungs. Other days, I felt a cautious sense of relief, the relief of finally knowing, finally naming my past, finally holding my story in my own hands. I started small, reconnecting with the people I truly trusted, writing letters to my birth family, meeting them in quiet cafes and parks, sharing coffee, conversation, and laughter. These moments were ordinary yet extraordinary. Each smile, each story shared, each glance of understanding stitched together fragments of my heart I hadn't realized were torn. One day, I visited the park near my childhood home. The same swings, the same sandbox, the faint scent of freshly cut grass lingering in the air. I watched children play, their laughter echoing across the playground, and I felt something shift inside me. I realized that my past, my identity, wasn't confined to one story or one set of parents. It was fluid, shaped by love, by experience, by resilience. I took a deep breath and let the warmth of the sun on my face sink in. For the first time in years, I felt a quiet acceptance. Yes, I had been lied to. Yes, my life had been shaped by secrecy. But I had also survived. I had taken control, faced the consequences, and discovered the people who mattered most. Mara and I never returned to the closeness we had once shared. That chapter of our relationship remained complicated, layered with both love and disappointment. But I forgave her in my own way, not because her actions were excusable, but because holding on to anger would only keep me trapped in the past. Forgiveness, I realized, is more about freeing oneself than excusing another. I began to focus on the present. I rebuilt routines that nourished me, quiet mornings with coffee and a journal, long walks where I allowed my thoughts to drift without judgment, phone calls with my birth family that made me laugh until my cheeks hurt, and afternoons with my adoptive parents, rediscovering shared memories while accepting the truths of our lives. There were moments of unexpected joy. My birth mother sent me a box of old letters and photographs she had kept all these years. Some were mundane, a school report, a birthday card, but others were intimate snapshots of my earliest life, moments I would never have experienced firsthand. I traced the lines of my tiny hands in the photographs, feeling a connection that transcended time and distance. My adoptive parents invited me to help reorganize the attic, where all the old family albums were stored. We laughed as we dusted, reminisced about birthdays, holidays, and quiet nights that had once felt ordinary but were now infused with new meaning. I realized that love, even when tangled with secrets, can be enduring. It's messy, imperfect, but it can coexist with truth if we allow space for both. Therapy helped, too. Sitting with someone trained to guide me through the tangle of emotions, I began to untangle grief from anger, betrayal from understanding, secrecy from intention. I learned that it's okay to feel both pain and compassion at the same time, that healing doesn't require erasing the past, it requires honoring it while choosing how to live moving forward. I also discovered a small but profound joy in sharing my story with others. Friends, colleagues, even strangers, responded with empathy, curiosity, and sometimes relief. They saw in my experience echoes of their own lives. It reminded me that personal pain, when shared, can become a bridge, a way to connect with humanity at its rawest, most authentic level. Over time, I allowed myself to dream again. I made plans for the future I wanted to build, a life guided by honesty, authenticity, and emotional integrity. I rekindled passions I had neglected, reconnected with friends who had supported me unconditionally, and embraced the freedom of being the author of my own story. One evening, sitting by the window with the soft glow of twilight painting the room, I reflected on the journey. The betrayal, the secrecy, the confrontation, they were chapters one could not rewrite. But the healing, the discovery, the reclamation of my life, that was my own to write. And in that moment, I felt an unexpected peace. I realized the moral of my journey: truths may be hidden, and people may make mistakes, but facing reality, embracing vulnerability, and reclaiming agency over our lives is how we grow. Life may hand us pain, but it also gives us the tools to mend, to rebuild, and to thrive. The final pieces of healing were quiet, almost mundane. I invited my birth family over for a casual dinner with my adoptive family. The air was filled with laughter, the smell of roasted vegetables and freshly baked bread. Stories flowed, jokes were shared, and for the first time, there was no tension, no secrecy, just connection. I watched my parents, my brothers, my birth family, and even Mara in the background, and realized that life wasn't perfect. It never would be. But perfection isn't the goal. Understanding, acceptance, and the courage to live authentically, that is the true measure of peace. I sit here now, in the quiet of my home, the afternoon sunlight spilling across the floorboards, thinking about how fragile trust can be, and how powerful truth is. For years, I lived believing one story, one version of myself, and all the while, someone else held pieces of the puzzle. Mara's secrecy shaped my childhood, my relationships, even my understanding of love. And yet, the moment I chose to confront it, to claim my story, I discovered something extraordinary: truth, even when painful, can free you. Life isn't perfect, and people aren't flawless. We make mistakes, we hurt, we hide things we think are for the best, but there is always a cost. Secrecy breeds distance, honesty builds connection. I've learned that forgiveness is not about excusing what was done, but about liberating yourself from the weight of resentment. It's about choosing peace, even when the past has been heavy and complicated. Now, I carry both families in my heart, the one that raised me and the one that gave me life. I carry the lessons of betrayal, the wisdom of truth, and the quiet strength of resilience. And I hold space for Mara, for her human flaws, for the love she tried to protect me with, however misguided. So, I leave you with this question: if you discovered a hidden truth that could change everything you thought you knew about your life, would you want to know? Would you have the courage to face it, to demand honesty, and to reclaim your story? Life is messy, and love is complicated, but there is power in truth. There is freedom in owning your story. And there is hope in choosing to move forward with clarity, grace, and heart. If this story resonated with you, consider subscribing to hear more real-life journeys that remind us we are never alone in navigating the complexities of family, love, and truth.